This is the River Arts District, so called because behind me you have a lot of artist studios, and behind the camera there's a river. It's a pretty good name. Now today in 2017, there's a lot going on, lots of construction, lots of people, and with these artist studios, lots of stuff being made. And 100 years ago, it was pretty much the same thing going on. It was just very different stuff being made. Where I'm standing right now, next to what is the visitor center, was a gas plant. They would actually make natural gas. And across the street from me, in a fenced-in area that currently houses construction equipment, there was an electrical power plant. Back that way down Lyman Street, there's still a waste paper facility that used to be a packing house, among other things. There was a leather tannery. Mountain Energy still has their yard there where they dispatch trucks and stuff from. They used to sell coal and stuff there. That way there was a cotton mill, an ice house. Each way there were tobacco warehouses. Behind me is one of the most distinctive buildings in the River Arts District. Today it's called the Wedge Building because if you look at it from above, the building is shaped like a wedge. Now that shape is no accident. It only had a certain footprint that it could fit into because on the other side of it, there was Roberts Street, which runs right up the front side of the building. And behind it were railroad tracks. It was originally built about 100 years ago, and it's housed several different things. For the longest time, it was the Farmers Federation. It was also home to a company called Afram, which was Asheville's first African-American owned and run business. And today it's got a brewery and a lot of artist studios in it. What made all the industry that necessitated that building in the first place was the railroad. And the same thing is true for every single one of these industrial places in what we now call the River Arts District. Every place in this strip had its own spur line, its own rails going off to the side so that deliveries could be made. This is where the ice house was. Now it's just a concrete foundation and a smokestack. But 100 years ago, and way less than that, this was a very important place. They made ice not just to keep stuff cold, like for food, but also for places like hospitals. When this area flooded in 1916 and knocked this place out of commission temporarily, there was a huge panic among the staff at hospitals in the area about not being able to get ice. So this was a very important place to keep running and to make sure that a delivery of coal to run the machinery could be made quickly, efficiently, and as frequently as necessary. There were tracks that went along right past here and a coal trestle that held it up above a hopper that could just drop the coal in and let the car pull out and make room for the next one. There were tracks all through here, and they pretty much followed this tree line right behind me. Trains would follow the tracks along this line up to what is now the Wedge Building and the buildings beyond it. And in fact, if you look over here, you can actually see things like those railroad ties and other debris. The tracks went even further than that. I am inside that tree line, and if you look behind me right here, there are more railroad ties and more. Directly behind me, right there, leaning against that tree, are the remains of a chain link fence that went behind a row of businesses that were right here on Roberts Street. And it's not just the fence that is still partially intact. Directly behind me, right there, still standing, is the gate. Where I'm walking right now is where that strip of businesses on the other side of that gate would have been. And the tracks went further still. I'm standing at what was once the gate for a local company called Dave Steel. And it's still going, but they moved about 1.5 miles that way. But back in the day, they had deliveries by rail. Back over there is where the strip of businesses was, and the rails used to cross from over there to over here. And the rails they went on to get into the complex are still here. And it went even further than that. Okay, I'm gonna play Human Frogger and go still further up the hill to this place. It's Ultra Coffee Bar. And despite the fact that they sling lattes out of there now, it has a much more industrial past. This is the entrance to Ultra Coffee Bar. And behind me, you can see the remains of the rails that once went over to the other side there. Now, when they took out the rails and paved over there for that intersection, they left these rails intact. And you can still see them as you walk through. They go right under the dumpsters. And past the building. And on the other side of the intersection, you can still see the remains of the tracks. Now, the railroad didn't just dictate what part of town the buildings could be in, and in certain cases, the shape of them. It also dictated the shape and the layout of the streets that run through this area. These crazy kind of gentle meandering curves are no accident. They're shaped this way because where I'm driving now used to have tracks running literally right through it. I can still see cracks in the pavement from where there were tracks along the edge of this street decades ago. They're shaped this way so that trains could get through here and the road could jump back and forth across them. And if you look here along the side of the road, this crack that runs parallel to the curb, that strip is where the tracks used to be. And if you look behind me, you can see where that strip crosses to the other side of the road. The trains would have come down this line all the way down there, right along where this curb is now, to make deliveries to a warehouse down there. Behind me is Depot Street. It's called that because there used to be a beautiful Spanish mission style depot at the site of what is now this beautiful parking lot. Cars have replaced trains for most of our transportation needs on a personal level. But 100 years ago, really the only way to get any kind of a long distance was on a train. And so many important, famous people came through here. Presidents, athletes, on the ground I'm standing on right now. And they were all here because of the trains that used to run right there. You can even still see a sign that says the Asheville Yard. This rail yard was a huge operation. There were trains all across these tracks. And if you see that tower behind me, there actually used to be a bridge that went from that hill, past that tower, all the way to Lyman Street, way over there. And when you got off the train, you had several hotels to stay at, including one that was in that building called the Glen Rock Hotel. It was a prime place to stay if you were white. If you were white, you had your choice. You could stay at the Glen Rock Hotel directly across the street from the depot. You could stay at the Depot Hotel, which was literally, as the name suggests, right next to the depot where this camera is standing. And if neither of those really suited you, you could stay at the Nantahala Hotel just behind the Glen Rock Hotel. And then there was another hotel still, I think it was called the Hotel Florence, just behind that. But if you were black, you had one choice. You had to walk past the Glen Rock Hotel back here to an unpaved alley, which was about right here. There was a strip of buildings over there and some over here on this side. And just behind those trees is what is officially called the town ditch. But back then, there was so much trash and junk dumped into that ditch and so much effluent coming out of factories upstream that was called Nasty Branch. And the unpaved alley that I was just talking about, which was about right here, was called, according to a 1950 Sanborn map that the fire department had, Death Alley. So just think, if you were black back then, you got off the train and not only could you not stay in any of the 4 hotels right there, you had to walk past and around those hotels down to a hotel that was the size of the smallest of the 4 white people hotels and had to share its space with an auditorium, because even auditoriums were segregated, down a muddy path to stay at a hotel between Nasty Branch and Death Alley. I'm pulling into the parking lot for what is now 12 Bones Smokehouse, and to my left is what used to be Day's Tobacco Warehouse. To my right is what used to be what was called the Hans Rees Tannery. They would tan leather mainly for industrial belts before synthetic rubber belts became more common. Ugh. Lots of raw history, very raw parking lots. And the edge of the rail yard. So I'm behind the big buildings of Riverview Station, lots of artist studios there. That's 12 Bones right there, and behind it is the Wedge Foundation Brewery. And several other buildings behind that. There's a skate park over there as well, and they're doing construction for a lot of other stuff. But 100 years ago, this was all the complex for one industry, tanning. In fact, the building where 12 Bones is was an office building, and if you go in there in one of the dining rooms, they still have the safe with the old school drawers in there. No money though, I checked. And here behind me is the rail yard. Decades ago, the area I'm in right now was absolutely full of railroad tracks. And you can see the railroad's byproducts everywhere, like these ties that used to hold tracks together. And this pile of rubble and old train brake shoes and stuff like that. And there's still, I don't know what that is behind me, but whatever it is, every few minutes it makes this really loud hissing sound. So it'll scare the crap out of you if you're not ready. You know, it's charming. There are still remnants of these railroad tracks too, like right behind me. They didn't need them anymore, and so they just left them. They're overgrown, the ties are rotted, but they're still there. Those spur lines would bring in the train cars that would have everything the tannery would need. And you can still see a section of the track right behind me. And it dictated little things, like that notch that's cut out of the corner of this building. That was so the train car could make the turn. There's some surprisingly... That's what I meant by the loud sound. There's some surprisingly old pieces of this raw history that you can find here. I'm at the edge of this parking lot, and just here in the gravel and stuff at the edge of the parking lot, there's another one. I've got these 3 pieces of coal that just fell off a train and no one even thought about. I mean, they were literally putting shovels full in it, so a few pieces falling off here and there wasn't a big deal to them. And they just built up, and they're still here after decades. After uncovering Thomas the Tank Engine's party foul, I got back into the car to go see some other stuff. Getting out of the parking lot was fun. Whoa! Jeez. What I really needed was some paved road. Paved road? Oh! Make that repaved road. Alright, crossing the bridge over the railroad tracks. The main yard is that way. And then there are some tracks over on this side where trains can just kind of, I don't know, sit, whatever trains do. In between arriving and leaving. I don't know, wait to get hitched up to something else. Okay, that commentary sucked. Sorry. Check this out. I'm pulling into the Habitat for Humanity parking lot. Now, that doesn't sound like it's really related to the railroad, but bear with me. Okay, I've just parked, and see? Told you I was going somewhere railroad related with this. Okay, so here I am, just got out of my car, and behind me is that really long train still moving. In that direction is Biltmore Village, where there is undoubtedly a crazy long line of cars in each direction, completely being held up by that train. You know what though? That train was there long before cars were on the roads here. The Habitat for Humanity thrift store is right behind me. And to my right is this building, owned by Habitat for Humanity. See? But it used to be a warehouse. And you can still see all of the cargo doors behind me. And there would be tracks that would run all the way up here. There's a platform over there, and you can still see the rail lines that would come up in this direction, at least over on the Norfolk Southern part of it. So the tracks have been replaced with asphalt, and the Southern Railways operations have been replaced by those for Habitat for Humanity. But they haven't completely erased all signs of this building's original purpose. See above my head, SR? That stands for Southern Railway. These days, you can hear a lot of people lamenting the fact that we no longer travel by rail when we need to get from one place to another. And it is true. It's much faster and much cheaper to go from one place to another on an individual level in a car or on a bus or something like that. And ironically, right over my shoulder, there is a mural of a bus. We're really close to a bus station. The thing is though, the railroad is still a very important thing for us, because even though few of us ever take a journey on a train, at least here in the United States, we are all affected by it. Industry uses it very heavily. That truck is pulling out of this factory, Silverline Plastics. And yes, it's making a delivery of manufactured goods from the factory. But as you can see behind me, there are still cars coming in delivering raw materials. I actually made a video of Norfolk Southern delivering full cars and taking the empty ones back to the rail yard a few months ago. It just goes to show that no matter how few of us ride on a train, at least outside of the major cities, we're all dependent on them. The train refuses to die. In fact, on this branch of the railway, this factory is the only one to get deliveries by rail. But despite that, Norfolk Southern keeps the tracks operational just for them. Because to them, the efficiency of the railroad makes it critical in its operations. Like the tannery, this mill, which used to be known as Martell Mills, has since been repurposed as an industrial site for many small companies, many of which manufacture things. They still have their railroad tracks in the back parking lot, and you can actually drive your car on them because they go right through the middle of the parking lot. And every single time I drive through, I just have to see if I can keep the car centered on the tracks. It's crazy. I'm in a car, but it's moving like a train car, because effectively it is one. This curve makes it hard. It rails a little bit. Oh. Ah! I can't get the back on. I just had a derailment in a car! Beyond the Silverline factory, there are still tracks. And as you can see, they're not exactly grown over. And there's a very good reason for that. While actual passenger lines haven't been run out this way in decades, there are still uses for these tracks, including the ones that you saw me driving on behind the mill. They run gas-powered trolleys on these original tracks. You can buy tickets to ride these gas-powered trolleys, and I volunteer with them whenever I have time to. Rocky, if you're watching this, sorry I haven't been there in a few weeks. My schedule got really crazy this summer, but I haven't forgotten you. I will be back. The name of the group that does it is the Craggy Mountain Line, a nod to the historic name for this, the Craggy Mountain Railway.
In 1880, the train arrived here and quickly transformed Asheville from a tiny mountain town into a real city. The train didn't just bring people to Asheville, the train brought Asheville as we know it into existence.